I canceled my wedding minutes before the ceremony after learning what my fiancé did to my dad. 29F, was raised by two men. I called them Big Dad and Small Dad. It was a silly thing we started when I was a toddler because one was a head taller than the other. When I was 12, Big Dad died in a car accident. It wasn't just a loss, it was an earthquake. Our lives shattered. Small Dad, who I'll just call my dad from here on out, was left with a mortgage he couldn't afford, a grieving preteen daughter, and a broken heart of his own. He never wavered. Not once. He took on extra shifts at the warehouse, standing on his feet for 12 hours a day, which is how he got the chronic leg injury he deals with now. I remember waking up at 2 a.m. to the smell of coffee because he was heading out, only for him to be back at 7 a.m. to braid my hair before middle school. He didn't know how to do it at first. He actually practiced on a mop head, so he wouldn't pull my hair. He was at every single play, every track meet, and every tearful breakdown over boys or exams. He is my hero. There was never a world where he wasn't the person walking me down the aisle. I met my fiancé 4 years ago. Let's call him my ex-fiancé now. He was everything I thought I wanted: stable, kind, and organized. His family is very religious and very conservative. I knew that from day one. I was always respectful. I wore more modest clothes to their dinners, I sat through their prayers, and I never made a scene about our differing views. They were polite to me, in that cold, distant way people are when they're tolerating you. I thought as long as my fiancé and I were on the same page, his parents' private views didn't matter. The wedding planning was stressful, but I thought we were navigating it well. My dad was so excited. He'd been practicing his walking because his leg had been flaring up. He bought a special suit. He even took dance lessons in secret so he wouldn't embarrass me during the father-daughter dance, even though I told him I didn't care if we just stood there and swayed. The red flags started appearing about a week before the wedding, but I was too blinded by the bride-to-be fog to see them. My fiancé started making weird comments. He asked if maybe we should have a processional-free ceremony where we just meet at the altar to save time. I told him no, I wanted the traditional walk. Then he asked if my dad would be comfortable sitting in the front row instead of walking because of his leg. I told him my dad was doing physical therapy just for this, so he was fine. My fiancé just dropped it. I thought he was just worried about my dad's health. I was wrong. The morning of the wedding was a blur of hairspray and champagne. We were at the venue, a beautiful old estate. My bridesmaids were buzzing around, but I noticed my dad was being unusually quiet. He was sitting in the corner of the bridal suite, rubbing his knee. He looked pale. I went over to him and asked if he was okay. "Just the leg, honey," he said, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. "I think it's acting up worse than usual. I don't think I can make the walk. I'll just sit down early so I don't cause a scene if I stumble." I felt a pit in my stomach. My dad has a high pain tolerance. For him to give up on walking me down the aisle, he had to be in agony. I started panicking, looking for ice packs, but he kept insisting he was fine and just needed to sit. He seemed ashamed. That was the part that didn't fit. My dad isn't ashamed of his injury. 10 minutes later, my maid of honor pulled me into the hallway. She looked furious. She told me she had stepped out to get water and overheard a conversation between my fiancé and his parents in the staging area. She heard his mother say, "It's for the best." It would have been a scandal to have that on display at the front of the church. At least this way. It looks like a medical issue. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I went straight to my dad and knelt in front of him. I told him I knew. Asked him if my fiancé had talked to him. My dad started crying. He told me that 2 days ago, my fiancé had come to him. He told my dad that his parents were threatening to boycott the wedding and pull their financial contribution, which wasn't even that much, if a gay man led the ceremony. My fiancé told my dad that it would be easier for everyone if he just made an excuse about his leg. My fiancé told my dad that if he truly loved me, he wouldn't want to start my marriage with a family feud. My dad, being the selfless man he is, agreed. He was going to sit in the back and let me think his body had failed him, all to protect my peace and my fiancé's reputation. I didn't even think. I didn't cry. I just went cold. I walked out of that suite, wedding dress trailing behind me, and found my fiancé in the men's lounge. He was adjusting his cufflinks. He looked at me and smiled, then saw my face and his smile died. "Did you tell my father he was a scandal?" I asked. My voice was so quiet it scared me. He tried to play it off. He said, "I was going to tell you after the honeymoon. I just didn't want you stressed on your big day. My parents have firm beliefs, and I have to respect them. It's just a walk, honey." What matters is us. You asked him to lie, I said. You let your parents insult the man who sacrificed his entire life for me, and then you coached him on how to hide so you wouldn't be embarrassed. He actually had the nerve to look annoyed. He told me I was being dramatic and that marriage is about compromise. He said his parents were the ones paying for the rehearsal dinner and the floral arrangements, and that we owed them decorum. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I didn't know who he was. This wasn't a man I could raise children with. This wasn't a man who would have my back if things got hard. He was a man who would sacrifice the people he loved to keep the peace with people who were bigoted. The wedding is off, I said. He laughed. He thought I was joking. When I stayed silent, his face shifted to anger. You're going to humiliate me over a 3-minute walk? Do you know how much money is on the line? My family is out there. Your family can leave, I said. And so can you. I walked back to the bridal suite, told my dad to get his coat, and told the bridesmaids to start packing. The chaos that followed was cinematic in the worst way. His mother tried to barge into my room, screaming about how I was a disgrace and that they knew I came from bad stock. My maid of honor basically blocked the door like a linebacker. I left through the back entrance. I didn't stay to talk to the guests. I sent a mass text to my side of the guest list explaining that the wedding was canceled due to a fundamental disagreement in values. Since then, it has been hell. My ex-fiancé has sent me dozens of messages. At first, he was begging, saying he was just trying to manage his difficult parents. Then he turned mean. He told me I'm unstable, that I ruined his reputation, and that I'll never find someone else who will accept my complicated family. His sisters have messaged me saying I disrespected their faith and that their parents are heartbroken at the waste of money. Even some of my own distant relatives have chimed in. An aunt told me I should have just gone through with the ceremony and dealt with the in-laws later. She said calling off a wedding an hour before it starts is cruel, and that I should have thought about the guests who flew in. But then I look at my dad. He's been staying with me, making me tea, and acting like he's sorry, which breaks my heart even more. He keeps saying, I didn't want to be the reason you're unhappy. I told him, Dad, you're the reason I know what love actually looks like. If I had married that man, I would have been unhappy for the rest of my life. I'm sitting here now, and the silence in this house is loud. I feel 100% certain when I look at my dad, but when I look at my phone and see the vitriol from the other side, I start to shake. They make it sound like I blew up a city over a minor seating arrangement. They make it sound like I'm the villain for not compromising. Was I too fast? Should I have pulled him aside, demanded he apologize, and tried to fix it right there? Should I have just done the walk and then gone low contact with the in-laws later? Or was I right to see this as the final boss of red flags? Am I the a-hole? Update. It's been a little over 3 weeks since the day that wedding didn't happen, and the silence I talked about before didn't last long. I thought things would cool down once everyone went home and the embarrassment faded. Instead, it turned into something much uglier. For the first couple of days after I posted, I mostly stayed off my phone. My dad and I packed up the decorations that had already been delivered to my apartment, returned what we could, and started the slow process of undoing 4 years of shared plans. The venue kept the deposit, which I expected. Some vendors were kind about it, others weren't. That part one can accept. Weddings cost money, and canceling one the day of means people lose time and work. What I didn't expect was the level of hostility from my ex and his family once they realized I wasn't going to change my mind. At first it was just messages. Dozens of them. My ex sent long texts that swung wildly between apology and accusation. One minute he was insisting he had only been trying to keep the peace with his parents. The next minute he was telling me I had destroyed his reputation in front of everyone he knew. He kept repeating that if I had just trusted him, he would have handled it later. That phrase came up again and again. Later never came during the 4 years we were together whenever his parents crossed a line, so that argument didn't mean much to me anymore. His mother was worse. I blocked her after the first few messages, but not before reading enough to understand the tone. According to her, I had deliberately set up a humiliation for their family because I hate religion. She also implied that my father had manipulated me into doing it so he could create drama and attention. Reading that made my stomach twist. My dad had been moving around the kitchen while I sat there staring at my phone. When he noticed my face, he asked what was wrong. I told him it was nothing and locked the screen, but he isn't someone you can fool easily. He just nodded and changed the subject, which somehow made it worse because I knew he understood. A few days later, the harassment spread beyond messages. My ex started contacting people around me. My maid of honor called one evening sounding furious. She told me my ex had messaged her asking why she interfered on the wedding day. Apparently, he blamed her for telling me about the conversation she overheard. When she didn't respond, his sister followed up with a message accusing her of sabotaging the ceremony because she hates traditional values. My maid of honor has the patience of a saint, but even she was rattled by that. Then my cousin texted me screenshots showing my ex had reached out to her as well, asking if she could talk some sense into me. A co-worker mentioned receiving a friend request from one of his sisters along with a strange message asking about my mental health lately. It started to feel like they were circling every part of my life, trying to create pressure. For a while, I ignored it. Blocking people became almost a daily task. Every time I thought I had removed the last contact, another message popped up from a different number or account. My dad kept encouraging me to step away from my phone, so I tried. We spent a few evenings watching old movies together and going for short walks around the neighborhood. His leg had actually been bothering him more than usual lately, probably from the stress of everything. For a little while, it felt manageable. Then the rumors started. A friend from college sent me a message asking if I was okay because she had heard a weird version of the wedding story through mutual acquaintances. According to what she'd been told, I had canceled the ceremony because I suddenly panicked about marriage and blamed my ex's parents to cover up my own breakdown. Another person apparently heard that my dad had shown up drunk and caused a scene, which forced the cancellation. That one actually made me laugh at first because my dad doesn't even drink. But the more versions I heard, the more obvious it became that these stories were being pushed deliberately. People don't invent identical details across different groups by coincidence. My ex had stopped messaging me directly around that time, which should have felt like a relief. Instead, it meant I was hearing about him through everyone else. About a week after the wedding date, my dad answered the door one afternoon while I was upstairs. When I came down a minute later, he was standing there looking tense. My ex had shown up. I didn't even realize he knew my dad's current address, but it makes sense in hindsight. He had visited here a few times over the years. My dad told me my ex was waiting outside in the driveway and asking to talk. I walked out there mostly because I didn't want my dad dealing with him alone. Seeing him standing there in normal clothes instead of a tuxedo was strange. The last time I had seen him was in that lounge on our wedding day, looking shocked while I told him it was over. The conversation that followed didn't go anywhere useful. He insisted again that everything had been blown out of proportion. According to him, his parents had simply been worried about how certain relatives might react, and he had tried to smooth things over in a practical way. The fact that he still framed it like that told me everything I needed to know. When I asked him if he had apologized to my dad for what he asked him to do, he avoided the question completely. Instead, he started talking about how much money his family had lost and how embarrassing the whole situation had been for them. Standing there listening to that, I felt the same cold certainty I had felt on the wedding day. I told him he needed to leave and not contact me again. He didn't like that. The argument escalated quickly. My dad stepped between us at one point because my ex kept raising his voice. Eventually, he drove off, but not before saying that I would regret ruining his life like this. After that day, the tone of the harassment shifted again. Instead of trying to convince me to reconcile, the messages turned openly hostile. His sisters began commenting on my social media posts whenever they could get around my privacy settings. They accused me of humiliating their parents and destroying a marriage over political nonsense. One comment suggested I had trapped their brother in a relationship for years just so I could publicly embarrass him. Friends started forwarding me screenshots of things being posted in local community groups. Nothing mentioned my name directly, but the details were obvious enough that people who knew us could piece it together. In those posts, the story always painted my ex as the victim of an unstable bride who ran away from the altar. At that point, I realized ignoring it wasn't going to make it stop. I spoke to a lawyer. The first meeting was mostly about understanding what my options were. I brought printed screenshots of messages, comments, and the rumors people had shared with me. By the time we finished going through everything, the stack of paper was thicker than I expected. The lawyer explained that harassment laws and defamation cases can take time, but what was happening had crossed the line into something actionable. Showing up at the house, contacting friends repeatedly after being blocked, and spreading damaging false stories were all things that could be addressed legally. Hearing that gave me a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Part of me hated the idea of dragging everything into court. I had already lost a relationship and a wedding. The thought of months of legal stress on top of that felt overwhelming. Then I looked at my dad sitting quietly in the waiting area with a folder of screenshots he had helped organize for me. He had spent years protecting me from problems when I was younger. Now someone was attacking both of us, and walking away quietly didn't feel like the right response anymore. We started with a restriction order. The process involved documenting the harassment in detail. Every message, every call, every comment had to be listed with dates and times. My maid of honor and a few other friends also provided statements about the contact they had received. Once the paperwork was filed, the court issued a temporary order requiring my ex and his immediate family members to stop contacting me, my father, or anyone closely connected to us. Serving those papers apparently caused a meltdown on their side. Within hours of them receiving notice, I got a long email from my ex accusing me of trying to ruin his career and silence his family. Ironically, sending that email violated the order itself. My lawyer handled that part quickly. The defamation case is a separate process, and it's still ongoing, but filing it changed the situation almost immediately. The public posts stopped. The messages stopped. Even the indirect rumors slowed down once people realized lawyers were involved. Life hasn't magically returned to normal, though. Some friendships were strained by the whole situation, mostly with people who felt uncomfortable being pulled into the middle. A few distant relatives still think I should have handled the wedding day differently. One of them told my dad it was a shame I had thrown away a good man over something that could have been discussed calmly afterward. My dad didn't argue with her. He just told her he was proud of me. Hearing that meant more than I can explain. As for my dad himself, he's been dealing with a strange mix of guilt and relief since everything happened. He keeps apologizing for causing trouble, even though none of this was his fault. The other night we were sitting in the living room watching television, when he suddenly said he had something to tell me. He admitted that when my ex first approached him about stepping aside during the ceremony, he had actually considered leaving the wedding entirely. His plan had been to quietly drive home and pretend the leg pain was too severe for him to attend at all. The only reason he didn't do it was because he was worried I would notice and worry about him. Hearing that hit me harder than anything else so far. The idea that the man who raised me thought he needed to disappear from one of the biggest moments of my life just to keep the peace made my chest ache. I told him again that calling off the wedding was the easiest decision I've ever made once I knew the truth. Since then we've started rebuilding some sense of routine. I'm back at work. My apartment no longer looks like a storage unit full of wedding decorations. The dress is still hanging in my closet because I haven't decided what to do with it yet. Some days are quiet enough that the whole situation feels distant. Other days something small reminds me of how close I came to marrying someone who thought protecting his parents' prejudice was more important than respecting my family. When that happens, I feel grateful that the truth came out before the ceremony started instead of years later. The legal situation will probably take a while to finish, but at least there's a boundary in place now. For the first time since the wedding day, my phone isn't buzzing every hour. And my dad has started practicing his walking again in the evenings, partly for his physical therapy, and partly because he jokes that someday he might still need to walk me down an aisle. If that day comes, it will be with someone who understands exactly why that moment matters.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.